Hello friends, welcome to Awdhesh Academy. Today we are going to learn about normative ethics. Normative ethics is a very important component of ethics. It teaches you that when you are under an ethical dilemma, what type of action you should take. So this is not a descriptive type of ethics. It does not tell what is ethics. It is a prescriptive type. It means it will tell you under this situation, this is the better course of ethical action. For example, if suppose there are some goons who are actually following a boy and they want to kidnap that boy or kill that boy. Now that boy is running and he is hidden behind a particular tree or a particular house. You have seen that. Now the goons come and they ask you, where is that boy? Now should you tell the truth? Because we have learned that we should always speak the truth. Because if you tell the truth, then they are going to kidnap that boy or kill that boy. But at the same time, suppose you tell lie, then it is violation of the very principle that we should always speak truth. But in that situation, you are saving the life of the child by telling a lie. So under such type of situations, when we are under ethical dilemma, what is the right course of action, that is taught under the discipline which we call normative ethics. Now normative ethics basically investigate the set of questions that arise when considering how one ought to act morally in a given situation. So we have basically 4 types of normative ethical principles that we are going to discuss today. The first principle is called virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is basically given by Aristotle and it is supported by Thomas Aquinas. What is virtue ethics? You have seen a movie. In a movie, a hero is a good man. Whatever he does for the interest of the society, not for his interest. So even if suppose he take a life of somebody, it is for a good cause. If he is kind, he is good. If he kills somebody, he is good. If he even tell lies, he is good. And this is what is virtue ethics. It means that if you are inherently a good person, if you are inherently a virtuous person, a nice person, then whatever action you will do, it will be an ethical action. So that's what Aristotle told. He says that our actions are manifestation of our own self. It means that if you are a good person, your actions will be good. And if you are a bad person, all your actions will be bad. So that is the basic meaning of the virtue ethics. That means we should try to become virtuous person, because if we become virtuous person, if we become good person, all our actions will naturally become good. Now this concept of virtue ethics has been given in Bible also. At one point of time, Jesus Christ says, for a good tree does not bear bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. For every tree is known by its own fruit. A good man out of good treasure of his heart bring forth good, and an evil out of evil treasure in his heart bring forth evil. For out of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaks. That means just like a good tree will give you good fruit, and that is why it is known as good fruit. In the same way, a virtuous person will always do good things. And that is why our attempt should not be to dissect the evil and good, but rather try to become a good person ourselves, think good for the society, because if we do that, all our actions will become good actions. But that is not the case with other philosophers. The second important principle is called deontology. Now what is this deontology? Deontology is basically derived from the Greek word deon, which means obligation or duty. And Immanuel Kant is the greatest philosopher of deontology. What he says is that you should do the actions according to the law, according to the rules. For example, if the law is that you should speak the truth, you should speak the truth all the time, irrespective of the consequence. You should not bother about what is going to be the consequence. If something is prescribed in the law or in the rules, you should follow the law or the rules. That is what is deontology. Deontology is also described sometimes as a duty or an obligation, and it is a rule-based ethics because it is the rule which binds you to your duty. If you are breaking the rules, for whatever reasons you are breaking the rules, you are doing a wrong act. So this deontology theory says that actions are most important. If you are doing the right action according to the law, whatever is the consequence, you are doing an ethical job. As a bureaucrat, as a civil servant, it is our duty to follow the law because we are the implementer of the law, and if we don't follow the duty, if we don't follow the law, how can we enforce it to other people? You will find that many people will support that encounters are good, breaking the law is good, as far as the end is good. Deontology says no, you should not break the law, you should comply with the law. Sometimes it may appear harmful, but over a period of time, over the long period, it is always better that everybody in the society follow the law and the rules. But unlike the principles of deontology, there is another principle which is called consequentialism or teleology. Now teleology comes from the word telos, which means the end or the goal or the purpose. That means what ultimately is achieved by your action, that is most important than what is your intent. Because many times people have a very right intent and the results are disastrous. If you do good things in your opinion, but the result is bad, then according to this teleology principles, your actions are not ethical. Ultimately, what matters is the result. So you can see that this is an opposite principle of deontology. Now, there are many theories as far as this consequentialism is concerned or teleology is concerned. For example, one principle is called Utilitarian principle. Now, Utilitarian principle means you should try to maximize the happiness of the most number of people. So, if you are doing something which is maximizing the happiness of the society of as many people as possible, then your actions are ethical actions. The fourth principle is called ethics of care or relational ethics. Now, this school of thought was founded by feminist theorist, notably Carol Gilligan. She argues that our morality arises out of the experience of empathy and compassion. Empathy and compassion is a very natural characteristic of a person. We cannot be happy when we find other people are suffering. And there is a natural desire to see that the people who are suffering, we try to remove those suffering. That's why the word comes sympathy, means similar feelings. So if somebody is unhappy, you are unhappy. And if you do any action which makes the person happy, then that is basically an ethical action. So this principle is very, very important nowadays, and it emphasizes the importance of interdependence and the relationship in achieving ethical goals. And this ethical action is one that nurtures relationship and it strengthens the family and the society. So instead of following a particular principle, if you think how you are going to make the society stronger, more loving, more compassionate, more empathetic, then that is going to be the ethical action. Friends, in the previous lesson, we have learned about the different normative principles and we have learned the basics of deontology. Today, we are going to learn about the different types of deontology principles. So, let us first recall what we understood by the deontology term. So, the word deontology is derived from the Greek roots deon and logos. The deon basically means duty and logos means reason. So, deontology means that an action is moral if it can be considered as a duty with reason that it is universally acceptable. That means if you are believing on deontology, then whatever is the law or rules, you should follow it as a matter of duty, and that is what is deontology. Deontology is also sometimes called duty-based, obligation-based or rule-based ethics because a moral person must follow the ethical rules at all times. So, in the other types of philosophy, there are not much rules, but in the case of deontology, the rules are sacrosanct. That means under every situation, you must follow the rule, whatever is the consequence. So an action in deontology is more important than its consequence. And an ethical decision should be made considering one's duties and rights without paying heed to the consequence arising out of that action. For example, if you have to speak truth, you should always speak truth, whatever may be the consequence of speaking the truth. Now, we can divide them into three different categories of deontology, and the first category we can say is categorical imperative. Now, this categorical imperative was the theory which was given by Immanuel Kant, who said that morality is based on humanity's rational capacity. Earlier, it was believed that the moral standards are coming from the scriptures, which are supposed to be the words of God, and therefore, morality is something which is spiritual in nature, which is divine in nature. But Kant challenged that, and he said, no, the morality is something which is based on human beings' rational capacity. And he said that all the moral laws can be derived using rational thinking. Then he has given this term categorical imperative. A categorical imperative is basically an absolute unconditional requirement that must be obeyed in all circumstances and is justified as an end in itself. That means suppose you have to speak truth, then you have to speak truth in all the conditions, irrespective of the consequence, because speaking truth is an end in itself. It should not be treated as a means to something else. So one must act only according to the maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. For example, we can lie and there can be personal benefit of speaking lie, but we don't want that to become a universal rule. We don't want a world where everybody speaks only lies, and therefore we should speak truth irrespective of the consequence. And so the categorical imperative basically means that we should speak the truth whatever may be the consequence, because we want always speak truth to become a universal law. So once we decide about a particular rule which can become a universal law, then that is called categorical imperative. But we will discuss more about categorical imperative when we will discuss the lesson about Immanuel Kant. The second type of deontology principle is called Gandhian ethics. We know that Mahatma Gandhi believed in the righteousness of action. He believed that noble ends cannot be achieved by following evil means. He once said, "They say means are after all means. I would say means are after all everything. As the means, so the end." So this is one of the very famous quote of Mahatma Gandhi, where he said that we have to focus on the means. You cannot achieve good ends if you are following evil means. For Gandhi, the principle of truth and non-violence were non-negotiable and immutable. So he did not use honesty as the policy, truth as a policy, or non-violence as a policy, because for him it was sacrosanct, that is not to be compromised. So Gandhian ethics is basically in the form of deontology because it believes on the means rather than on the ends. The third important principle about deontology we can say is Nishkam Karma, and this principle is also known as selfless action, which is actually provided in Bhagavad Gita. Now in Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says, "You have a right to perform your prescribed duties, but you are not entitled to the fruit of your action. You should never consider yourself to be the cause of the results of your activities, nor be attached to inaction. You must be steadfast in performance of your duty, abandoning attachment to success and failure." So, Lord Krishna very clearly says that we have to focus on the action without bothering about the consequence. And therefore, this Nishkam Karma emphasizes the performance of one's duty rather than working for the result of the action. And therefore, Nishkam Karma is also one of the deontological principle which is created in our own country. So friends, today we have learned about the different types of deontology principles which can be used in ethics, and I hope that you got a good understanding of that. Thank you very much. Friends, today we are going to learn about Immanuel Kant. He is considered to be the most influential philosopher after Aristotle. He was a German philosopher and he spent most of his life in a single place in Germany, which was his birthplace. He was a bachelor and he was very, very meticulous and followed the routine very rigorously. He was said to be so punctual in his evening walk that housewives used to set the clock depending upon at what time Kant will cross the window of their houses. He was so particular. He was an unadventurous person and he did not have any interest on music or arts, but he was a very analytical person who has a lot of interest in maths and science. Kant has given so many concepts that these are considered to be path-breaking in philosophy. So today we are going to learn about the ethical principles of Kant and also the philosophy which he has given to the world. First of all, let's understand Kant's theory of knowledge. The theory of knowledge is also called sometimes epistemology. He has basically said there are two types of truth. One is the truth of reason, other is the truth of fact. Now, what is the truth of reason? Truth of reason basically means that something which is true because we have defined it like that. For example, all bachelors are unmarried. Now, this is basically a truth of reason because if you are bachelor, by definition, you are unmarried. The second is the truth of fact. It basically depends upon the factual condition. For example, if you make a statement, all bachelors are happy, this becomes a truth of fact. This may be correct, this may not be correct. This is called synthetic preposition because it is not original. It is not something which has been defined like that. It is a conclusion which only a facts can tell whether it is right or wrong. While the truth of reason is also called analytical preposition. Now let's understand the two important concepts which has been given by Kant. One is called the priori knowledge, other is called the posteriori knowledge. Now priori knowledge is something which is based on the rational discussion, logical reasoning, not a matter of experience. For example, we can say socialism is best or democracy is the best. We can prove it also that this is the best, but whether it is actually the best, that we cannot say. While the posteriori knowledge is something which is based on the experience. So unless you experience something, you will not be making this statement. It's like tasting the mango. Now unless you taste a mango, you cannot make a statement as to how it tastes. You can write it sweet or anything like that, but actually its taste is very, very peculiar of mango. In the same way, unless you have analyzed how democracy works, how dictatorship works, how socialism works in the real life, you cannot say whether it is a good system or not. For example, Marx, who has given the philosophy of socialism, would have thought that by following this, you will create a world which is an ideal world. But in reality, we have seen what type of socialism has actually been created. In the same way, democracy appears very, very logical. People will elect their own leaders. People will elect their own kings. So logically, it should work very nice. But we are seeing what type of people are elected in India or in other democracies. So what is actually experienced is not something which is said in the theory. In theory, you can prove anything, but in experience, only the reality is shown. So in his time, there has been disputes between two divergent philosophies. One was called empiricism, which based on the empirical data, based on experiment, based on experience. Other was called rationalism, which was basically based on pure logic reasoning. So there has been disputes between them. Now empiricists believe that everything is basically depends upon the experience. So they believe that human mind is like a clean slate, and experience write the knowledge, thoughts, beliefs on that. While the rationalists did not believe that. They believe that you have basically a vision, thought, aptitude, potential, whatever you call it, a nature, and depending upon that, you see the world differently. So two people, two real brothers who are brought up in the same identical environment will see the world differently because they are having different aptitude and attitude for life, which is partly genetic. So they were disputing about which is superior, whether experience is superior or whether rationality is superior. Kant tried to create a synthesis between the two. He said that experience as well as the rational thoughts both are basically combined to be each other, because without experience a rational thought has actually no meaning. By logic you can prove anything, but unless that work in the real life, it has actually no meaning. Now let us learn about it from an example. So what happened that there were two salesmen who were sent to an African country. They were actually working in a manufacturing company which was manufacturing shoes. Now both the salesmen went to that country. They came back and they have given the feedback to the manager, the top manager or the CEO. So one of the salesmen said, there is no market in Africa because nobody was wearing shoes. So when nobody was wearing shoes, naturally when you produce shoes, nobody is going to buy it. That was his logic. The second salesman said, there is great market in Africa because no one was wearing shoes. Now he saw the same thing in a different manner, and he said because nobody was wearing shoes, that means there is a lot of demand of shoes. If we can, make them understand the importance of shoes, then what happens that we can sell a lot of shoes there. So both the salesmen, my friend, saw exactly the same thing, but the conclusion they have drawn is different because their rational thoughts were different. But ultimately what is going to be true is something which is going to be actually working in the real life. So salesman 1 may be right, salesman 2 may be right, depending upon what is actually found to be true in the reality. So this is what the greatest contribution of Kant. He said that experience and rationality both has to combine, because if you have no experience of a particular rational thought, it has no meaning. Kant's another great contribution was in respect of moral laws. We normally believe that these moral laws are coming from directly by God and their divine in nature. Like for example, don't steal, don't kill people. These are mentioned in every religion, and it is widely believed that if we do these acts, we will be incurring a sin and will be punished by God. And that is what keep the people on the right track. Kant challenged that. He said that all these laws can be derived by human logic. So he says that man is having a self-legislating capacity. That means he can derive the rules which are important for running the society. Another great contribution of Kant was that he has given a deontological theory. What is the meaning of deontology? It is coming from a Greek word deon, which basically means duty, and logos, which basically means reason. So the word deontology means that the action is moral if it can be considered to be a duty with the reason that it is universally acceptable. That means if something can be done in a way that if everybody does it like that, then it is acceptable. So for example, truth. Speak truth. So if everybody speaks truth, this is fine. But suppose we make a law, everybody should lie. Is it possible to survive in the society if everybody starts lying? Naturally, it is not going to happen. because we expect other people to speak the truth. And therefore, always speaking lie or don't speak truth cannot be accepted as a universal law, and therefore it is not a correct moral law. So he basically said that this morality is not divine in nature, and this is basically designed or created by humans' reason and logic. So what Kant said is that basically you should do the moral action as a duty. If an action is moral, for example, you should speak the truth. You should speak the truth irrespective of the consequence, because it is your duty. In the same way, if you are a government officer and your job is to see that no illegal structure is built, then it is your job to see that if illegal colonies are built, you should demolish. Whether that is going to lead to a desirable consequence or undesirable consequence, it will make some people homeless, it may even cause death to some people, then you should not be concerned. As far as you are doing the right thing, you should be happy. And that is the moral course of action. Kant has given the concept of categorical imperative. But before we learn about the categorical imperative, let's understand the concept of imperative. Now, what is the meaning of imperative? Imperative is basically a command which should be followed. The imperative can be of two types: categorical imperative and hypothetical imperative. Now, hypothetical imperatives are valid only on certain conditions. For example, if you want to go to a medical college, you must study biology. This is a hypothetical imperative, not valid for everybody. So, if you are not interested in going to the medical college, you need not study biology. Let us now take second example. For example, if you are hungry, you should eat something. That means if you are not hungry, you don't have to eat something. So, these are the examples of hypothetical imperative. The second type of imperative is called categorical imperative, which is valid for everybody, whether you are interested or not. For example, don't cheat on your taxes. You are supposed to pay your taxes. Now, whether you are interested in paying the taxes or not, no. It is your duty to pay the taxes. In the same way, don't kill people. Now, this is also a categorical imperative because it is valid for all the people. Now, categorical imperative is something which is actually to be followed whether it is profitable to you or not. For example, if you have taken a debt from somebody has given you a loan, then you don't want to return the loan because it is beneficial to you. Now, categorical imperative says it is not to be done, because if everybody stop paying the debt, then the entire economic and business activity will be flopped. It will not work. And therefore, don't return the debt cannot be said to be a universal principle which is valid for all the people, all the situation, and therefore it is not a categorical imperative. So, categorical imperative is something which is valid and acceptable all over the world as a duty. So, for example, you should not steal. It is a categorical imperative, because a society where people don't steal each other's wealth is a good society. You should not injure. You should not kill. You should not, do any harm to anybody, and you should always be kind to people. Now, these are the examples of categorical imperative, because these can be prescribed as a duty to all the people in the world. So, the meaning of the categorical imperative is that these can be prescribed as a duty to the entire world, to everybody. And if everybody start following that, the world will become a better place. And so, you have to understand that this particular principle teaches you that human beings are end in themselves. They are not a means to something. When you are talking about the consequence, that consequence is more important, then you can use human being as a means, because the end result is good. For example, in socialism, it is quite permitted to kill thousands and thousands of people because it is going to create a good society in future. But according to Kant, if something is wrong for one person, it is wrong for everybody. And therefore, this has given the concept of human rights, that even the criminals should be given the same right, because you cannot have separate law for law-abiding people and for the criminal. This Kant's philosophy is actually very much valid for the civil services. as a civil servant, we should follow the Kant's philosophy, because we should not worry too much about the consequence. What is most important, whatever we do, should be in accordance with the law. Because if you break the law, you will be punished. But if you do everything according to the law, even if the consequence is not good or favorable, then also no action can be taken against you. And therefore, as a civil servant, we should always be following the law and follow the Kant's philosophy. But my friends, Kant's philosophy has also been criticized a lot. It is said that end is also very important. It is not only that the means are important, that you should do the right thing, you should also be responsible for the end result which you are going to achieve. Because many evil thing happens with good intention. You implement a particular philosophy which you think is good, and you implement strictly, and as a result what happens, that many people are displaced and many people suffer. So this has been criticized that ultimately these type of theories where like universally something is to be valid is not possible. For example, you should not cheat. But if everybody is cheating in the examination, should you not cheat? If everybody is corrupt, should you not be corrupt? If everybody is telling lies, should you always speak truth? So ultimately, things depend upon the situation. If the situation is different, you should be able to adapt to the situation. So there is a counter view of Kantism also. And this says that morals are not absolute in nature. They are the code of conduct which has been developed by the people for a human survival. And they vary with the nature and the circumstances of the group. And every idea is having an equal and opposite idea. For example, speaking truth may be good, but sometimes speaking untruth may be good. So every theory, for capitalism you have socialism. For democracy you have authoritarian. Now it says that for every theory there is a counter theory, and ultimately both theories has to combine, and when they are synthesized, then you will have a new theory. And that is how new theories are created, and that is how the society grows. So friends, today we have learned about the philosophy of Kant. He has taught us that the experience and the reasoning has to go together. Pure reasoning is bad. Pure experience is also not sustainable. In the same way, he has also given the concept of categorical imperative, which tells us that all the moral laws are not divine in nature, but it can be derived from human logic. He has also told us about the concept of deontology, that the thing should be done as a matter of duty, irrespective of the consequence. So, I hope that you have been able to understand the philosophy of Kant. Thank you very much. Friends, we are learning about the thoughts of Western philosopher about the ethics. Today we are going to learn about the thoughts which has become very, very popular in modern time, and that is about the philosophy of utilitarian. Utilitarian philosophy basically is a practical philosophy. It does not talk about any theories. It talks about the results. It says that ultimately it depends upon what is the result of our action. If the result is bad, then our actions are bad. And if the result is good, then our actions are good. So this is the philosophy which we are going to learn today. Now the three main philosophers of utilitarian are Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, and Henry Sidgwick. Now what is the basic philosophy of utilitarian? Let us try to understand. Utilitarian philosophy says that we are governed by two masters. One is pleasure, other is pain. Now, we always seek pleasure or happiness, and we always want to avoid pain or suffering. So the actions are good actions, or they are approved as an ethical actions when they promote happiness or joy or pleasure. In the same way, the actions are wrong and they are disapproved as far as ethics is concerned if the action results into pain or sufferings or unhappiness. Now, what is the philosophy of utilitarian? How do we measure about the ethical value of an action? It says that the moral worth of an action is solely determined by its contribution to the overall utility of maximizing happiness or pleasure as summed among all people. What does it mean? That if I take an action, it is going to make some people happy, some people unhappy. Some people more happy, some people less happy. In the same way, the pain and sufferings will also be of varying degree. Now imagine that we can measure that. Then if we add all the happiness and we find that ultimately the overall happiness of the society or the people who are affected by our actions goes up, then our action is ethical. And the more the happiness increases, the higher is the level of our ethical action. So what does it mean? It says that we should maximize the happiness of maximum number of people, because that is the best way of maximizing the happiness in this world. It does not differentiate between the good people, bad people. It does not say whether you should make only that people happy or those people happy who deserve happiness. It does not differentiate. It says that everybody has a reason to be happy. Everybody has a right to be happy. And we are nobody to differentiate whether the person really deserves happiness or not, because the moment we decide whether the person is worthy of happiness or not, we start pick and choose, and ultimately the overall happiness goal is not satisfied. So it says that basically we will not make any difference. Even if the person is unworthy by some respect, still we should try to increase his happiness. However, utilitarian principle accept the principle of declining marginal utility. Let's understand the concept of declining marginal utility. Let us say that you are stranded in a desert and you have not drank any water for a couple of days. You are likely to die if you don't get water immediately. Now somebody comes and he says, I will give you a glass of water, but I will charge you 1000 rupees for it. Naturally, you will be very angry on that because he is exploiting you, but your life is more precious. You will be willing to give him 1000 rupees and drink that glass of water. But for the next glass of water, if he asks 1000 rupees again, you are not going to give, because that value of the water has gone down once you have sufficient water to sustain for a couple of more hours. Maybe you can pay him 100 rupees. So he gets 100 rupees, give you second glass of water. Now you drink that also. For third glass, you will not be willing to pay even 100 rupees. Maybe you can still pay 10 rupees because you are still not totally satisfied. So you have seen that the value of the water has come down from 1000 rupees to 100 rupees to 10 rupees, and it will continuously go down. And my friend, a stage will come when that person will give you 1000 rupees and still you will not be able to drink the glass of water because your stomach is so much full. So the marginal utility of a particular product declines. The first 1 lakh rupees of your income, the level of happiness you get is much more than the next 1 lakh rupees which you are going to get. And suppose you are getting 1 crore rupees of salary, then maybe that 1 lakh rupees of additional amount is not going to make any difference at all. So the declining marginal utility of any product is a fact, and that is accepted by the philosophers of utilitarians. That is why they say that if somebody is having a huge amount of money, a large amount of money, his happiness is not going up. So from 1 crore rupees, if you add 1 lakh rupees, it's not going to make a difference to his life. But that 1 lakh rupees, if you take from him and give to the poor person, then his loss of happiness will be much lesser than the gain of happiness which this poor person is going to get. And that is why they believed in the egalitarian justice and believed in the principle that you should tax the people who are on the higher bracket, take the money from the people who are having too much of money or they are very rich, and give it to the people who are poor and desperate so that their happiness arises. So this gives a moral justification of taxation and also taking the money from the higher level of people. However, you have to ensure that the money is taken in a legal manner because if the person has lawfully and with lot of hard work, he has earned that money, he will not be willing to share that money with the poor person who is able to get the money without doing any work. And therefore, you should understand that there has to be a balance you have to make between taking the money from the rich people and reducing his happiness and actually giving happiness to the poor people. Now, utilitarian principle is different from two very important principles which look similar but actually are different. One is egoism, other is altruism. Let's understand that. Egoism and attitude where you give a privileged position to yourself. That means you only bother about yourself. You want to maximize your happiness even if it makes the whole world unhappy. Now, this is the meaning of egoism. But when you promote egoism, the overall happiness of the society goes down because you are making so many people unhappy only to increase your happiness. So, utilitarian is not an egoistic principle because it gives equal value to all the people, whether it is you or somebody else. The second important principle with which this utilitarian principle is often confused is called altruism. Now, altruism means that you are keeping the interest of other people higher than your interest. That means you are doing a sacrifice for other people because other people's interest is much more than your interest. This type of principle is widely made popular by Christianity and also some modern philosophers who has actually talk about sacrifice, value of sacrifice and value of humanity. So, utilitarian basically is not even an altruistic principle because it does not give more value to the other people's happiness, but it gives same value to your happiness as well as other people's happiness. So, utilitarian in essence means the happiness is same for everybody. The satisfaction level of persons are same for everybody, and you must see that you maximize the happiness of as many people as you can. Now, logic is why should we make other people happy? Why it is important? For that, the utilitarian philosopher says that man is not totally selfish. Man wants to help other people because in a society, when we make other people happy, then we also become more happy. So, even for selfish interest, you must have seen that we care for our friends, we care for our children, we care for our parents, because when we make them happy, we make ourselves happy. So, there is a way when we can increase the overall happiness by not sacrificing our own happiness. So, the utilitarian philosophers believe that it is very much a human nature to make others happy, and therefore it does not contradict the human nature at all. And this principle has been widely made popular by Jesus Christ, who says that to love your neighbor as yourself is the perfection of the human being, and that is basically also the perfection of the utilitarian principle. So, what are the important tenets or the principles of utilitarian? The first is the consequentialism. That means a right action is one whose consequences are ultimately good for the society or produce happiness. So, action does not matter. You can choose any type of action provided that it increases the happiness when the results are produced. So, it is consequential in nature. Second is that it talks about the maximization of the good. Irrespective of the worthiness of the person, the overall happiness of the people should go up. And the third is that it is agent neutral. That means we don't pick and choose whose happiness is to be increased and whose happiness is not to be increased. Now, the next challenge is about the measurement of utility. How you measure the utility, this is a great challenge. So, there are different ways of measuring the utility. First, we can say is a motive utility. That means we should actually have a good intention to help other people. That is very important. Instead of, trying to argue about the different type of possibilities which actually does not exist or rarely exist in the human life, our goal should be that whenever we take an action, we should see that maximum happiness goes. So, that should be our intention, and with that motive, we should perform all our action. The second is the total utilitarian principle. That means we should try to see that the happiness of all the members of the society goes up. So we sum total all the happiness of the people, and whichever way it goes up, that should be our goal. The third is the average utilitarian principle. What it says is that we should try to see that everybody reaches toward the average level of happiness. That means the people who are very poor, just like in the wealth criteria, those who are very, very unhappy, we should focus on them and try to maximize their happiness, and we should not bother about those people who are already very happy because they are above average, and that should not be our concern. We should not try too much to increase their happiness. The fourth method of measuring the utility is negative utilitarian principle. What does it mean is that we should try to see that the pain is minimized. Instead of maximizing the happiness, if we focus on the negative side and try to see that the pain of the people is minimized, then that will automatically maximize the happiness. But sometimes it is argued that if you want to really minimize the pain, and if you eliminate all the people who are on the bottom of the unhappiness, means who are having below average happiness, then naturally if they are killed, if they are no more, then the average level goes up. So it can be argued that this is a fallacy of this particular argument. Then the fifth important thing is, which is called sentimental utilitarian principle. It talks about the utilitarian value of not only the human beings but all species who are in this earth, whether they are animal, birds, or human beings. So we should try to see that the happiness of all living beings who are having sentiments, that is increased. Now let us try to use this principle and solve a particular case study. Now here is the case study. There are two eminent men. One person is a Nobel laureate of physics who is critically ill and he is needing kidney transplantation. The other person is a Nobel laureate of medicine. He is also critically ill and he is needing heart transplantation. And imagine that the surgeon has immunity of law and he cannot be hanged or he cannot be punished. Now, there is a person who is basically a drunken tramp, means he is a drunkard fellow. So if we take the kidney and the heart of that drunken fellow and plant it to the Nobel laureates, now logically speaking, if we kill that drunken tramp, it should increase the happiness of the society in two ways. Number one, this fellow is already a nuisance. He must be a pain for his family, for himself, and for the neighborhood. So if he is eliminated, naturally those people will feel happy because they will be less unhappy now. The second is that his kidney and heart will be used for the Nobel laureates who will be able to do a lot of new innovations, and that will increase the overall happiness of the world. So the question is, should we kill that Trump and give his heart and kidney to the Nobel laureate? Now, this is what is the dilemma. So in order to ensure that our actions are ethical, the utilitarian philosophers divide our action into two parts. One is called the act utilitarian, other is called the rule utilitarian. Act utilitarian means that our action should be able to create the greatest happiness in the society. So in this particular case, we have seen that it is true that if the heart and the kidney is taken, it will increase the happiness of the society. The second is called the rule utilitarian. Now, rule utilitarian means whether that generalized principle produces more happiness than otherwise if it has to be constantly followed. That means if that principle is followed on every single case, whether it is going to increase the happiness or not. So the rule utilitarian principle actually is violated if you start taking the heart and kidney of a drunken fellow and plant it to the people who are more worthy. As we have already said that it does not differentiate about the worthiness of a happiness, and therefore this violates the rule utilitarian, and therefore this cannot be followed. So the right action is one which follows both the principle. That means act utilitarian is followed and also the rule utilitarian is followed. In this case, the surgeon cannot kill that drunken fellow because it will violate the rule utilitarian. So this action will not be ethical. Now let us understand one of the very vital difference between two philosophical principles. One is called teleological principle, other is called the deontological principle. So there has always been a conflict between the two. The word deontology comes from the words deon means duty and logos means reason, which basically means is that an action is moral if one obeys the moral laws unconditionally. So this has been followed by Kant. That means if truth is to be spoken and if truth is right, then every condition you should speak truth, whether it is going to lead to harmful consequences, unhappiness or anything. This is called the deontology principle. The other is called the teleology principle. Telos we know means and, just like in telescope we use this word, and logos means the reason. That means the teleology principle says that an action is an ethical action when ultimately the end result is good. So it is basically a consequential result of the action which matters, and this principle is followed by Plato and also all the utilitarian philosophers. And there has always been a conflict whether it is right to focus on the end or it is also important to focus on the means. So you should understand that this dilemma is basically a subjective thing. Sometimes a teleological principle may be better and sometimes the deontological principle may be better. For example, it may not be right that you should always speak the truth when that truth is going to kill so many people. So you cannot say that deontology is the right principle should be adopted in all situations, or that teleology is the right principle which should be adopted in all situations. Now, as a civil servant, there has always been a conflict between the civil servants and the politicians because of the reasons that the politicians are more concerned about the maximization of the happiness for the society, whether they are deserving or they are not deserving. And therefore, what happens that they follow more the utilitarian principle. As far as the civil servants are concerned, they follow the principles of deontology. That means basically they do their duty according to the law. And therefore, there has been a conflict between the politicians and civil servants, just as there has been conflict between the end and the means. And ultimately, we should try to see as a civil servant that as far as possible, we take an action which is in accordance with the law and also which is maximizing the happiness of the society. The civil servants will not be able to know at the time of taking action whether it is going to lead to the maximization of the happiness or not. For example, if you are demolishing a jhuggi jhopdi because it has been illegally constructed, there is a possibility that some people may die and some people may lose their life because of the loss of shelter, and therefore your action may actually lead to more unhappiness in the society. Suppose you arrest a person for doing some small theft and put him behind the bar, there is a possibility that his family suffers because of that and they may even die. Now you cannot be held responsible for their death because you are doing the right action. So in the civil services and in all the government services all over the world, your bona fide actions are protected according to the law. So if you are taking a reasonable precaution and care, then even if the action does not lead to the right consequence, you are protected from the action. Now, this utilitarian principle is actually looks very, very logical, but like democracy sometimes produces negative things, in the same way, the utilitarian principle also is criticized on so many reasons. The first criticism is that utilitarian principles ignore the distributive aspect of happiness. That means whether it is properly and fairly distributed to all the people, it ignores, because its only goal is to maximize the happiness. And therefore, if you give that money or give that happiness to the most unhappy person in this world, naturally the overall happiness will go up. But whether that person really deserves that happiness is something which is not questioned by the utilitarian, but it is not morally correct. Therefore, it is argued that not only the distribution should be done, but also the fair distribution of happiness should be done. The next criticism is that you can't promote the overall well-being of the people when it is against your interest. Now, it may look very good in theory, but in real life, we will not do anything which is going to make ourselves unhappy. And therefore, it says that it is humanly impossible for the people to engage into this act where you maximize other people's happiness at the cost of your own happiness. The next criticism is that all the pleasures are of different nature. Just because somebody is going for a physical pleasure, let us say, somebody go for mental pleasure, somebody go for a spiritual pleasure. Now you cannot equate all the pleasure, because the physical pleasure is of the lowest degree, and that is why John Stuart Mill has said that the physical pleasures is worthy only to the swine. That basically means that only swines can enjoy the lowest level of pleasure, that is the pleasure of senses. And therefore, we should not give equal importance to all type of happiness. We should give more importance to the happiness which are more intellectual, mental and spiritual, rather than focusing on the physical type of pleasure or happiness. Then it is also argued that happiness is not the only thing which people seek, because many times we suffer so many challenges in life and we want to suffer in life. For example, a mother suffers tremendously when she gives birth to her child, but she enjoys that because that gives her a feeling of worthiness and a purpose. And therefore, it is also criticized that happiness is not the only purpose of the human being, and we want to take challenges, we want other things of life as well. Then it says that the selfishness and altruism have pleasure of their own. And therefore, basically when we are altruistic, we are also gaining pleasure, and therefore altruistic act is also in a way a utilitarian act. We have to also understand that many times you must have seen that the soldiers give their life, or the ascetics, or the people who are rishis basically bear a lot of torture, because that is something which gives them happiness. So ultimately you have to understand that what gives happiness to one person may not give happiness to other person, and therefore it is argued that there is no way you can make everybody happy, because the same thing given to one person make him happy, other person it will make him unhappy. And the very purpose of our life will be defeated if we are only going for maximization of the happiness. We make certain sacrifices for our children, for our parents, and that gives you a type of joy which you cannot get by enjoying any type of pleasure. And finally, the criticism is also made as to how to measure happiness. It says that it is impossible to measure happiness by any objective criteria, because happiness is very, very subjective, and you are feeling happiness for one action just moment, and within few moments the same action will cease to give you that level of happiness, and therefore it's a very, very subjective thing, and it is impossible to measure the happiness in a correct way. So friends, today we have learned about the utilitarian principle, which is one of the very popular philosophy of modern time, and we have learned how we can maximize the happiness of society, and what are the negative side if we go for maximization of the happiness of the society.